This happened a few years ago, back when I was about 15 or 16. It was that awkward age where you're too old to play with toys but too young to drive or go somewhere, so you end up just doing stupid stuff to pass the time. My best friend, whom I'll call Alex, lived in a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. It was one of those places where the houses all looked the same, and nothing exciting ever happened. We used to have this routine where I'd spend the night at his place, and once his parents fell asleep, we would sneak out. We weren't looking to cause trouble, break into cars, or vandalize anything. Honestly, we were just bored out of our minds. We would walk around the neighborhood at 2 a.m., talking about life or video games. The only game we played was hiding from cars. If we saw headlights sweeping across the trees in the distance, we'd dive behind a bush or a parked car and wait for them to pass. It gave us a small adrenaline rush, thinking the cops or a neighbor might see us. On this particular night, the air was warm and heavy. It was late summer, so school was starting back up soon, and we were trying to make the most of our freedom. After walking our usual loop twice, we were bored again. That's when Alex brought up the homeless camp. To give you some context, there was a set of active railroad tracks that ran behind the neighborhood, separated by a thin patch of woods. Down the tracks, maybe a mile or so, there was a denser patch of forest where people sometimes camped out. We knew about it because we'd seen the worn-down trail leading into the brush during the day. Now usually, two teenagers walking into a homeless camp in the middle of the night is a terrible idea. But we had a reason to feel safe. One of the guys who lived back there was named Jerry. Jerry was actually an old friend of Alex's dad from way back in the day. Life had just taken them in different directions. Jerry wasn't an addict or dangerous. He had actually come over to Alex's house a few times. Alex's dad let him shower there, gave him food, and even offered to help him find a job. Jerry turned it down every time. He legit told us once that he just liked living off the grid. He didn't want to pay taxes or answer to a boss. Because we knew Jerry, and we knew he was usually the one keeping an eye on things back there, we thought it would be cool to go visit. We figured we'd sneak up, see if he was awake, maybe say hi, and then head back. It felt like an adventure, but one with a safety net. We cut through a backyard and climbed the gravel embankment up to the railroad tracks. Walking on railroad tracks at night is loud. The gravel crunches under your feet and it echoes. We tried to walk on the wooden ties to be quieter, but the spacing was awkward, so we just walked along the metal rails, balancing like tightrope walkers. It was a longer walk than we remembered. During the day, everything feels closer. At night, with the darkness pressing in on both sides of the woods, it felt like we were walking for an hour. Eventually, we smelled smoke. "Someone's definitely up," Alex said. We slowed down. Up ahead, off to the left side of the tracks, the woods opened up slightly. We could see the orange glow of a fire flickering against the tree trunks. We stepped off the gravel and onto the dirt path that ran parallel to the tracks, trying to be quiet. We were a bit nervous. The plan had seemed solid back in the bedroom, but out here in the dark, the what-ifs started creeping in. What if we get there and Jerry isn't there? What if it's someone else who isn't friendly? So, instead of just walking right up to the fire, we decided to sneak up and get a visual first. The trail split ahead. The main path continued straight alongside the tracks, but a smaller, beaten-down path cut hard to the left, leading directly into the clearing where the camp was. We got maybe 100 feet from the camp, roughly 30 meters. We were crouched low, using the tall weeds as cover. The fire was decent-sized, lighting up the immediate area around the tents and tarps. I was scanning the area for Jerry, looking for his green jacket or his familiar beanie. That's when I saw it. It wasn't Jerry. We looked down the trail, past the camp, and saw a faint silhouette of what looked like a person. But they weren't sitting by the fire. They weren't coming from the tracks. The silhouette looked like it was coming from deeper in the woods, walking toward the camp, but staying just outside the ring of light. They were tall. That's the first thing I noticed, and they were standing completely still. We froze. I grabbed Alex's arm and pulled him down. We ducked slightly to the side of the trail, blending into the shadows. "Is that Jerry?" Alex hissed, his voice barely audible. "I don't think so. Jerry walks with a limp. That guy is standing straight up, We watched for another 10 seconds. The figure didn't move toward the fire. It didn't call out to anyone at the camp. It just stood there facing the direction of the tracks, facing us. A heavy feeling dropped into my stomach. You know that feeling when you realize you aren't the observer anymore, but the one being observed? I told Alex, I don't like this. We should sneak the hell out. He didn't argue. Same feeling, he said. Let's go. As I said, the fire at the camp was just enough to light the area well enough to see vague shapes, but it left deep shadows everywhere else. We ended up slowly creeping slightly off the trail, backing toward the railroad tracks. We wanted to keep the bushes between us and that figure. We moved backward for probably 30 or 40 feet, about 9 to 12 meters. It was slow going. The brush was thick, and every time I moved my foot, a twig snapped. It sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I stopped. Dude, I'd rather just hit the trail and slowly walk back. This is too loud, and I can't see anything. I was worried that while we were messing around in the bushes, that guy could be flanking us. I wanted to be on the open ground of the tracks where, if we had to, we could run. We played football. We were both pretty fast sprinters. If it came down to a foot race, I liked our odds on the gravel better than in the vines and thorns. Alex nodded. Okay. On 3, quietly. We slid out of the brush and back onto the dirt path. I immediately looked back toward the camp. My heart hammered against my ribs. The silhouette had gotten closer. It had moved away from the firelight, closer to where we had just been standing. The light was dimmer there, but I could clearly make out that someone was standing there, facing us. They had closed the distance by half without making a sound. My first thought was rational. I thought, maybe they saw us duck into the bushes and were just coming to check who it was. Maybe it was Jerry after all, wondering why 2 kids were creeping on him, but it just felt off. The posture was wrong, aggressive, rigid. Alex and I looked at each other. We didn't need to say a word. We both mutually and silently decided to pick up the pace. We started walking briskly, not running yet, but moving with purpose back toward the bridge. We took about 10 steps. Almost on cue, like we were synced up, we both looked back over our shoulders. The silhouette was sprinting. It was now booking it towards us. Run, I yelled. We didn't hesitate. We hightailed it as fast as we could. I could hear my own breathing and the loud, rhythmic crunch of our sneakers slamming into the railroad ballast. It felt like a nightmare where your legs are heavy, but we were flying. Thankfully, the trail alongside the tracks was wide enough that we weren't bumping into each other. I didn't look back. I was terrified of what I would see. I just focused on the wooden slats of the railroad bridge coming up in the distance. The bridge was the halfway point. It went over a creek, and there was nowhere to hide on it. If we made it across, we were close to the residential street. We hit the bridge, our footsteps echoing loudly on the wood now. I felt like I was going to throw up from the exertion and the fear, but I didn't slow down until we were fully on the other side. I grabbed the railing of the bridge, spinning around, gasping for air. Did we lose him? I choked out. I looked back past the bridge, staring into the darkness of the trail we had just come from. Nothing. I didn't see anyone. The trail was empty. It was dead silent again, except for the crickets and our heaving breaths. If that person had kept running, they would have been on the bridge by now. They must have stopped right at the edge of the darkness, right where the trees ended. Let's go, Alex said, breathless. Don't stop. We jogged the rest of the way back to his neighborhood, constantly checking behind us. We didn't see any headlights, and we didn't care about hiding from them anymore. We just wanted to be inside. We got back to his house pretty fast, climbed back through the window, and locked it. We sat on the floor of his room for an hour, just listening, waiting to hear a tap on the glass or sirens. But nothing happened. Luckily, that was the end of it. We never found out who that was. We never asked Jerry about it because we were too scared to ever go back to those tracks, day or night. I don't know if it was a squatter, a drug dealer, or just someone who really didn't want to be found. But the way they ran, silent and fast, still creeps me out when I think about it. Before we dive into the next story, if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell icon to stay updated with our upcoming scary stories. This happened during my senior year of high school. It's one of those nights that is burned into my memory, not because something happened directly to me, but because of how close it came to destroying people I cared about. It was a Tuesday, I think. A completely random weeknight. I was already in bed, probably around 11:30 p.m., just scrolling through my phone, when my best friend called me. Let's call him Ryan. Ryan and I have been best friends since middle school. He wasn't the dramatic type. If he called me this late, it was usually because we were planning to meet up for a late-night food run or video games. But when I answered, his voice was wrong. He sounded breathless, like he had just run a mile, but also incredibly small. "I need you to come over, please. Just come over," he said. I sat up. "What's going on? Are you okay?" "Something happened," he said. "The police are here. Just get here." He hung up before I could ask any more questions. I didn't hesitate. I threw on a hoodie and shoes, ran downstairs, and told my parents that Ryan was in trouble and that I had to go. They trusted me, and hearing the panic in my voice, they didn't argue. I got in my car and drove. Ryan lived in a subdivision about 10 minutes away. It was a nice neighborhood, quiet, well lit, the kind of place where people walk their dogs at night without a second thought. When I got to the main entrance of his subdivision, I saw why he sounded so shaken. A police cruiser was parked sideways across the entrance lanes, its blue and red lights flashing silently against the trees. An officer was standing outside the car. I slowed down and rolled down my window. "Road's closed, son," the officer said. He looked tense. "My best friend lives in the cul-de-sac at the top of the hill," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady. "He just called me. He's really shaken up." The officer looked at me for a second, then glanced up the hill toward where the other sirens were coming from. "Go ahead. But stay in your car when you get there until an officer clears you." I drove slowly up the winding hill. As I crested the top and turned into Ryan's cul-de-sac, the scene was surreal. There were at least 4 or 5 police cars parked at chaotic angles. Their lights were bouncing off the 2-story brick houses, turning the familiar neighborhood into a strobe-lit nightmare. I pulled up to the curb near Ryan's driveway. Before I could even put the car in park, Ryan came running out of his front door. He ran right past a cop who tried to stop him and met me in the street. He looked pale, like all the blood had drained out of his face. He was shivering, even though it wasn't that cold. "Dude, what is happening?" I asked. He pointed to the house next door. "Someone broke in. They beat her. They beat Mrs. Klein. Mrs. Klein was his neighbor. She was a nice lady, lived alone, and kept to herself." Ryan started explaining it to me in rapid-fire bursts, his hands shaking. He said he had been in his room when he heard screaming, not just a yelp, but terrified, guttural screaming from outside. Apparently, someone had broken into Mrs. Klein's house. He had used something heavy, a tire iron or a crowbar, they thought. He started beating her with it immediately. It wasn't a robbery. He just went straight for violence. Miraculously, she managed to get away from him. She ran out of her front door and sprinted across the lawn to Ryan's house. Ryan told me I heard banging on the door, like someone was trying to break the door down. Ryan's dad was out of town on a business trip, so it was just Ryan and his mom at home. His mom had run to the door, thinking maybe it was a car accident or something. She unlocked it and opened it. Mrs. Klein literally fell into the foyer. Ryan said she was covered in blood. It was pouring from her head. She collapsed right onto the welcome mat. And then, the horror part. Ryan's mom looked up. The attacker was right there. He was walking up the walkway toward the front door, holding the heavy tool. He wasn't running. He was just walking, calm and focused. Ryan's mom grabbed Mrs. Klein by the shirt and dragged her fully inside. She slammed the heavy wooden door shut and locked the deadbolt just as the guy reached the porch. He didn't leave. He hit the door, Ryan said. The attacker had swung the heavy tool at the door before it fully latched, but when it didn't open, he took the weapon and smashed the small decorative window at the very top of the door. Glass rained down into the foyer, onto Ryan's mom and Mrs. Klein. Ryan's mom started screaming at the top of her lungs, shouting that she had a gun, she didn't, and that the police were coming. The guy didn't try to unlock the door through the broken window. He didn't yell back, he just stopped. According to Ryan, the guy just turned around and walked back down the driveway, disappearing into the darkness of the street before the police arrived. He didn't run away. He just strolled off like he had finished a chore. The police let me go inside the house with Ryan. They wanted us off the street while they searched the woods behind the subdivision. Walking into that foyer is something I will never forget. There was blood everywhere. It wasn't like in the movies where it's just a little smear. There was a pool of it on the hardwood floor where Mrs. Klein had collapsed. There were distinct handprints smeared on the white baseboards where she had tried to pull herself up. But the thing that made me sick was looking up. Above the door, the small semicircle window was shattered. Shards of glass were scattered all over the bloody floor. There was a smear of blood on the white door frame, way up high where the attacker had swung the weapon. It showed just how tall he was and how much force he had used. If Ryan's mom had been 2 seconds slower, or if she hadn't managed to drag Mrs. Klein in, that guy would have been inside the house with them. I spent the night there. Neither of us slept. We sat in the living room with the lights on, listening to the police radio's chatter outside. Every time the wind blew a branch against the siding, we both jumped. There were 2 cop cars stationed in front of the house all night, but it didn't feel safe. It felt like the walls were made of paper. Mrs. Klein survived. She had to have her scalp stapled shut and had a lot of defensive bruises, but she lived. She never went back to that house, though. She put it up for sale a week later and moved out of state. The scariest part? They never caught the guy. No DNA didn't belong to the victim. No fingerprints on the door because he was wearing gloves. No security cameras in the cul-de-sac picked up a clear image of his face, just a dark figure in a hoodie. It was completely random. The police said he probably just picked a house, broke in, and when his plan was interrupted, he walked away to avoid getting caught. To this day, when I visit my parents and drive past that subdivision, I get a chill. I think about that blood on the floor, and I think about the man walking calmly into the darkness, knowing he's probably still out there somewhere. When I was a little kid, maybe 5 or 6 years old, we lived way out in the country. I'm talking about a place that wasn't even a town, just a collection of houses spread out along gravel roads and endless fields. It was the kind of place where nobody locked their doors. We didn't even have keys to our house. If we left, the door just stayed unlocked. Everyone knew everyone, and there was this heavy sense of trust. We had a neighbor who lived about a quarter of a mile down the road. She was an older woman, a widow, and to me, she was basically a third grandmother. I would ride my bike down to her house all the time. She always had snacks, those little Debbie cakes or homemade cookies, and she let me play in her living room while she watched her soaps. I have these weird core memories of playing in her house. She kept a bin of toys from when her own kids were little. My favorite was this old vintage Mr. Potato Head. It was the kind where you actually had to use a real potato, not the plastic body they have now. I spent hours sitting on her rug, sticking plastic eyes into a raw potato, completely oblivious to the world. The neighbor had a son. He was an adult, probably in his mid-20s at the time. I remember hearing he had been away in the army, or maybe he was working out of state, but he moved back in with his mom for a while. I didn't interact with him much. To a 6-year-old, a 25-year-old guy is just another boring adult. He seemed quiet. He would sit on the porch and smoke, watching me ride my bike in circles in the driveway. He never did anything mean to me, never yelled. He just had this blank stare that I didn't understand back then. One afternoon, he came over to our house to talk to my mom. My older brothers were teenagers at the time, probably 14 and 15. The neighbor's son told my mom he was planning a camping trip for the weekend down by the river bottoms, a few miles past our property. "I can take the boys with me," he offered. "Show them some survival stuff, it'll be fun." Now, in our community, this wasn't an unusual offer. Neighbors took each other's kids fishing or hunting all the time. But my mom got this feeling. She told me later, years after the fact, that the hair on the back of her neck stood up. There was no logical reason for it. He was our sweet neighbor's son. He was a veteran. But she just looked at him and said, "No, they have chores to do this weekend." He didn't argue. He just shrugged, said suit yourself, and walked back down the gravel road. A few days later, my mom and I ran into him at the little general store, the only store within 20 miles. We were grabbing milk, and he was at the counter buying cigarettes. He looked terrible. His face was puffy and red, and his arms were covered in welts. My mom asked him, "My goodness, what happened to you?" He scratched at his arm and mumbled, "Got into a nest of ground bees down at the creek. Tore me up pretty good." My mom nodded and we left. But as soon as we got in the car, she got quiet. See, we spent every summer day at that creek. We knew every inch of it. The banks were mostly clay and rock. Ground bees were rare there. And even if they were there, for a grown man to get stung that many times, dozens of times, he would have had to be doing something weird, like rolling around in the brush or running through the thickets where people don't usually walk. It just didn't sit right with her. The bee stings didn't make sense for a casual walk by the water. 2 days later, the news broke. It was all over the local TV station. A family of 3, a mom, a dad, and their young son, had been found murdered at a campsite about 10 miles from our house. They were camping in a secluded area way off the main trails. People in our area were in total shock. Murders didn't happen here. Maybe a theft or a fight once in a blue moon, but not a triple homicide. Everyone was terrified. People actually started locking their doors for the first time in their lives. My mom sat at the kitchen table watching the news report, and I saw her face go pale. She was thinking about the bee stings. She was thinking about how he asked to take my brothers camping the same weekend this family was killed. She remembered that the area where the bodies were found wasn't near the clean, rocky creek he claimed to be at. It was deep in the woods, the kind of heavy, overgrown brush where ground bees actually live. If you were chasing someone through that brush, or if you were hiding in it, you'd definitely disturb a nest. She called the police. I remember being sent to my room to play while 2 detectives sat in our living room. They were big, serious men in suits who looked so out of place in our farmhouse. My mom told them everything. The weird feeling she had, the offer to take the boys, and the bee stings that didn't match his story about the creek. The detectives listened. They told her, "You aren't the only one who called about him." Apparently, they brought him in for questioning. They searched his truck. They found some stuff that made them suspicious. I think I heard later there was a specific type of knife or rope, but back then, DNA testing wasn't what it is now. And the bee stings, while suspicious, weren't proof of murder. He had an alibi from his mom, who swore he was home part of the night, probably just trying to protect her son. They couldn't pin it on him. There wasn't enough hard evidence to arrest him for the murders. The case went cold. The neighbor's son eventually moved away a few months later. Life kind of went back to normal, though my mom never let us go down to the neighbor's house alone again. The nice old lady passed away a few years after that. Fast forward about 5 years. I was a preteen by then. We saw the news flash across the screen. It was him. He had been arrested in a different state. A woman had run out of gas on a lonely highway, and he had pulled over in his truck, offering to give her a ride to the gas station. Once she was in the truck, he attacked her. He tried to abduct her and likely kill her. But this woman fought back. She managed to unlock the door and throw herself out of the moving truck. She survived and flagged down another car. He went to prison for abduction and attempted murder. He's still there as far as I know. After the news of his arrest came out, the old detective who had visited our house...
Por quien no convierte cada dificultad en una guerra. La estabilidad emocional es un refugio silencioso en un mundo lleno de caos. Otra cualidad profundamente atractiva es la claridad interna. Es saber quién se es, qué se quiere y qué no se está dispuesto a tolerar. Esta claridad no necesita explicarse ni justificarse. Se refleja en decisiones firmes, en límites sanos y en una coherencia entre palabras y acciones. Cuando alguien vive alineado con sus valores, proyecta una fuerza tranquila que inspira respeto y confianza. La responsabilidad personal también juega un papel clave. Asumir las consecuencias de las propias decisiones, sin culpar a otros ni a las circunstancias, demuestra madurez real. No hay nada más atractivo que una persona que no se victimiza, que aprende de los errores y que utiliza cada caída como